Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Bramwood, and this is a place where I speak with people who are starting and scaling tech businesses. We'll be talking with founders, investors, and everyone in between. This week, I sit down with Mike Paisley from Heata, and our conversation ranges from how they pivoted their products, how tech can help those in need, and how their product is heating homes at no cost.
If we support anyone with free hot water, that's really useful.
Of course.
But some part of the network, we want to support those people in, that are struggling, finding it harder, people in full poverty, so social housing, for example.
Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. So Michael, thanks for coming on.
Sorry.
How was your journey up this morning?
The train was delayed, a bit unsurprising, but it was fine apart from that.
Classic. Well, look, I always like to start these things with a really generic and actually fairly deep. Who is Michael Paisley?
Well, it's not terribly complicated, but I suppose my background's I studied graphic design. This is maybe probably before your time, but there's a dot matrix printer. You filled in a questionnaire and it prodded out graphic design at school, and I thought, what is that thing? And graphic design, what does that mean? And then I sort of found out a little bit more about it and saw that it's actually quite a good fit for what I end up doing a lot of the time, which is designing things and drawing things and stuff like that. So really, my heart is sort of in that space, but kind of a little bit like a magpie, I suppose, a visual magpie. You sort of spot this, you spot that. I like words. And it's always about bringing those things together, usually to solve some sort of problem, in a simple way. So I suppose that's kind of how I see myself a little bit, as a sort of problem solver who's curious about the world.
What a great explanation of who you are. I don't think I could have answered it better myself. Yeah, so the kind of graphic design background. And then how did you get into the technical world then?
I was at an agency for quite a long time, and I went to 4 days partly because I wasn't sure what to do next. I really enjoyed my job. You learn a lot about many different companies, which is quite fascinating, actually. It sort of fitted my personality quite well. But as you progress, you become more of a manager, I suppose. You do less of the actual graphic design. You get involved in the politics of, managing workloads and being in a hierarchy. And that side of things, aspects of that I enjoyed. I really like working with people and mentoring people, that kind of a thing. But office politics a bit less so. And the pressure of delivering, being responsible for money coming in or whatever else. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next, and the typical path would become very senior in an agency or start your own thing. Around the same sort of time, I met a friend through a friend, and he was sort of at a similar juncture, but from a technical background. And so we were sort of dealing with the same problem. We thought, well, maybe we could do something together. And so that day off, I suppose, from my day job became a day where we started to work on projects together. And we ended up doing a little Kickstarter campaign, built a little company, made a product, and started selling that and learning about what's involved in doing that. And then we were sort of always looking for another project, and probably a more technical project in some ways, because that was Chris, the other co-founder of Heata. His background is more in that side of things, and we thought there were some really good opportunities to do something there. And so he sort of dragged me into the technical space a little bit, but I'm trying to make sense of it, I suppose, and help us articulate what we're doing.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. I kind of pre-warned you this slightly 5 minutes ago that I was going to ask you to do this, but Tax vision is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job. And I know you weren't always Michael at Heata. Could you draw me what you wanted to be when you grew up? And talk us through it, I guess, if you can, while you're doing it. I don't know how. Are you a good artist, or are you a graphic designer?
I wouldn't say a good artist, but I do like drawing. But that's not necessarily going to be evident from what I do here. It's a little bit tricky because probably it was quite simple when I was young, and as I've grown older, it's become more complicated, I suppose. But probably, really, what I wanted to do, which is what many young boys want to do, I'm going to draw an old school kind of football. And that's what I wanted to do. I'd get new football boots, and, I'd put them beside my bed and look at the sole and, imagine being a footballer, I suppose. And so it's not bodies are quite hard to draw. I could draw it, but it would take a long time. And that was it. And so I sort of really wanted to do that, score some goals. And that's probably what I like doing most, or where I'm happiest. So it's not the best drawing, but
Could you sign it for us?
I don't know about signing things. But I'll do an MP. There you go. So it's a little bit less.
So to everyone listening, that's probably one of the best drawings we've had.
Well, it's not a terribly high standard then, but
Yes, unfortunately, yes. That's more about our guest than it does you, perhaps. But yes, thank you. So the dream of being a footballer didn't pan out.
Well, no. Well, obviously, clearly not, as it won't for many people. But it's been a great source of, I love playing any ball sport really, and the people you meet through football, the teams you played in, the friends you make through that's been an important part of my life. But it's sort of an adjunct to the other side of me, which is interested in almost most things, whether it's politics, new gadgets, any sort of art and culture related things. I love all of that sort of thing. But it's quite almost like there's a bit of a dividing line between football and the culture that surrounds it, and that other part of me. And so my day job ended up being that other part of me.
So you kind of touched there on how you got into technology. How did Heata become what it is today?
A friend of ours was bringing startup-like innovation to British Gas, other companies too, but British Gas was one of his clients, and they'd identified a number of areas where they wanted to look at how they could introduce some new ideas to British Gas. One area was fuel poverty and helping the elderly. And so Chris, the other co-founder, got chatting to his friend down the pub, as you do, and he thought, well, actually, something I've been thinking about could fit in that space quite nicely. And so we sort of teamed up with our friend and pitched that idea to British Gas, and that was sort of how it was born. And so, the idea, I suppose I should just explain what the idea is, but at the time, Bitcoin mining was very topical. Obviously, it's had many peaks and troughs, of course, but people were talking about the energy and the waste heat that it was generating. And so we put a miner into a barrel of mineral oil, and then the heat from the miner went into the oil, obviously, and then we hooked that barrel of mineral oil up to an oil-filled radiator with a pond pump. And so the radiator was heated by the byproduct of that processing. So it was a bit tricky to get through security in British Gas, but when it was there and sort of on the table, there was a little screen we hooked up to, and you could see that it was making money, mining. At the same time, the radiator was hot, and so all the electricity costs were covered, and you were making money on top. But then the radiator was there providing heat, and so they liked that idea, and then we got a bit of funding to take that forward.
So, and where did the idea come from for it? Was it?
Well, if you you touch your phone and you're doing something a bit complicated, it starts to get warm, doesn't it? And Chris, it always sort of annoyed him, I suppose, slightly speaking for him here, but I think that's just true, but that a lot of heat is generated by, making it hard for electrons to get through something, so that friction generates heat. And it's not doing anything apart from generating heat. So surely those electrons could be doing something useful at the same time. And so compute is a perfect example of that. All of the electricity that goes into processing on our phones, laptops, whatever else ends up as heat. But at the moment we just get rid of it. And so he was just thinking, well, maybe we could make a cool radiator at one point, that was doing something cool as well as providing heat. But in the end, we sort of pulled in, mining to be that thing. We've since moved away from that because it's very volatile and arguably it's not a terribly good use of energy.
But it's just interesting, isn't it, that all this heat's going to waste, and you've managed to find a solution that. What I'm trying to say here, you found a way of finding an ecologically friendly way of getting rid of that heat that was going to be produced anyway.
Everything we're doing, we're tapping away on our phones, using using cloud services, watching Netflix, whatever else. Behind that, there's a big box, with loads of servers, lots of fans, lots of cooling going on, and all of that energy is is ending up as heat, which is a big problem. And then we get rid of it, spend more energy, maybe as much as, well, it's between sort of 20 and 60%. So let's say 40% extra, energy, just to get rid of that waste heat. But heat in itself is useful. So it seems a bit like madness in a way. So if we can, it's trying to bring those two, heat is useful. So let's get rid of the cooling energy cost and then offset, a heating cost in society somewhere.
And are you still using Bitcoin miners, Bitminers now?
No, so we started there. I think ethically we're not. That's not something we really want to be doing.
Fair enough.
But there's a lot of compute out there in the world. Data centers are amazing. They're enabling everything we're doing. We've got this AI tsunami that's about to hit or hitting, and so there's loads of useful compute out there that's generating heat. And so what we want to try and do is use that useful compute to provide the heat that we reuse, and then as a result, it's way more energy efficient, than having. I suppose you've got so over here we've got the data center and the energy that's for the computer processing, if you like. Then let's just say you've got other energy for lights and all that sort of stuff. But then the other big chunk is the cooling energy cost on top of that.
Yeah. And
then on top of that, you've got somewhere else. In our case, there's someone using energy for hot water. So we are in our compute energy stack. We're getting we only have the IT energy cost effectively. We don't have that cooling cost, and we also within that are doing the hot water as well. So it's way more sort of energy efficient. But there are challenges in infrastructure and how you successfully deliver those compute workloads. I think the idea is a good one, something that we should be, trying to do, but it's going to take some effort to reimagine infrastructure to enable it. And we are sort of doing that in one way.
Well, I always feel like ideas like this, it's why has nobody thought of it before? It's kind of like Deliveroo, everyone saw Deliveroo.
I just think we should probably we haven't actually explained what it is. We started with mining and radiators. Radiators you use for half the year. So you don't want to be venting that heat for half of the year. And you don't want a seasonal compute business either. So we pivoted to hot water, because hot water demand in UK households is pretty constant all year round. And then a great heat sink as well. And so what we've done is we've repackaged the server that you'd find in a data center, and attached it to domestic hot water cylinders. So at this point in time, it's the kind that have got the foam insulation. You might be familiar with that. Typically older houses. So we cut a section of the foam away. We attach a thermal bridge onto the cylinder wall, and then that provides an attachment point for our server. And we attach that on there. So then when our server is, and this is in people's homes, so supporting people with sort of free hot water effectively, because the compute customer or Heata is paying for the electricity used for the compute. So then when that's doing processing, rather than that heat being chucked out the window, the heat's all going into the water in the cylinder. So that's so it's a distributed data center, if you like, and the servers live in people's homes. And then we work alongside the primary heating system there. So we're not providing all of the hot water. We just take the load off the existing heating system, which means it comes on less often, which means they pay less for their existing heating provision.
What's the downside?
We can't do all workloads because our units aren't tightly connected. The connections, we're going to be putting our own fiber connections in, which will improve things. But we're never going to look quite like a data center, which is incredibly tightly connected, and the network is as good as it can possibly be there. So we've got some challenges there, but we're also supporting some trends as trends towards decentralization. It's advantageous to have processing closer to where data is collected, for example, or if you're sitting on your phone and making some request, you don't want it to go all the way over to the east coast of America to figure out the answer and send it back. What if you had a a network of servers in your community, and it just had to go to a server, 400 yards away or something like that, and then send the result back from there. So there are sort of shifts in how infrastructure has been reimagined, which we sort of plug into quite well. But ultimately, connectivity is going to be the thing that enables us to do broader workloads, in time. But at the moment, it's batch compute we're doing, not real-time services like websites or apps. You have a chunk of data, you send it, it spends some hours processing it, and then it returns the results. So it's job loads that follow that kind of paradigm.
Wow. Yeah, it's an incredible cause, and I think when we spoke, you were targeting a certain kind of person to receive this free heat, essentially, right? Or you were looking at certain people, a certain group.
I mean, ultimately, we'd like to. I mean, if we support anyone with free hot water, that's really useful,
Of course.
But some part of the network, we want to support those people in, that are struggling, finding it harder, people in full poverty, so social housing, for example. So we're actively looking into partnerships there, so that, particularly, energy prices are, just gone through the roof, haven't they, recently, and people are struggling. And so I think it makes sense to just offset a hot water, heating cost wherever you do it. But if we can support people that really need help, then that would be great too. And then that gives us if we end up with a partnership with this social housing provider, then we can sort of grow into their estate of homes and support more people. And then you've got, the nice story then that you can build around that for companies in that local area. They can place their processing within their own community, for example. So you might have, how much compute you have to do as a company. It can be providing free hot water for people that live in your area. And so ideas like that start to become possible. And I think that's quite an exciting proposition for the for that sort of circular proposition, connecting people together, and then for compute to support the needs of for heat or hot water in our case in society. That'd be a really nice thing to bring those two things together.
Yeah, absolutely. Heata as a business right now, what stage is it at?
Fairly early stage. We've got a network which is getting towards 100 units now.
Wow.
In people's homes. So it's quite nice when we talk to people, they see this little map, I suppose, and little Heata icons representing Heata units. And each one of those is a family, or not always a family, but, a couple perhaps, or a young family. And so it's been really nice to start to get the feedback from the households, who have the Heata unit there, who are benefiting from the hot water. Some people are fascinated by what it's doing. Other people just like the fact that they're getting free hot water. But we've got plans to build a dashboard, not so that people can see. It's not about seeing what processing is being undertaken specifically, but just having a sense of my Heata unit has saved this much carbon, for example, or my Heata unit has saved me this much money, this month. Those sorts of things. So a bit of visibility on what it's doing and the benefit it's having.
Yes, and you recently secured investment, is that right?
Yeah, we closed around, when was it? End of September time, which was around about £1 million in total.
So what's a good workload for Heata?
So 3D rendering is a really good workload. That's something that we're doing a fair bit of at the moment. To give you an idea, every frame of an animation, let's say, we're not going to be doing Toy Story, but just a whole Toy Story in your mind is a good example. Every frame of that, 24 a second, obviously about 130,000 a 90-minute film, something like that, might take, let's just say it takes 5 hours to render per frame. So a 90-minute animation, about 5 hours per frame, something like that, would be be sort of responsible for about 95 tons of carbon, something like that, equivalent to like driving about 400,000 miles in your car, something like that. So they're incredibly processor intensive. And it's a good example, we might spend 20 minutes sending the files, out to the network, and then they spend days, rendering those frames. If you think about all of the media we consume, whether it's TV shows or animated films like Toy Story, or my son loves Octonauts, for example. That's a good example. And CGI and so on. All of that has got quite a big, carbon impact, which we don't really think about. So we really like the idea of, the Heata network providing, I suppose, becoming like a more sustainable partner for TV production houses. If you imagine if we were Octonauts, are you familiar with Octonauts?
I'm not, no.
No surprise if you haven't got children, but anyway, it's a group of little characters, and they look after the planet and the animals on it. And so I get, my son keeps me in line. He often talks about things that he's heard on Octonauts. So wouldn't it be wonderful if a show like that, for example, was rendered more sustainably on a network like ours? And so the production process would be is more sustainable and looking after the planet too. So it's the sort of thing I think we should be trying to do more of, anyway. But there's a great story to be told there too.
You've obviously secured investment, which is fantastic. And I'm not surprised because, again, one of the reasons I invited you on here today, because Heata is an incredible idea. It really, really is. A lot of it goes over my head, I must admit. But the high level view of it just makes complete sense. Obviously, telling that story to potential investors must have been quite easy.
It's got a good hook, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people understand that data centers have got this problem, this heat problem, and they understand that data centers and compute is a massively growing market. But also we're doing things in a different way.
Sure.
So I think they've got to try and get their head around. It's like you need people that have that early adopter mindset or can understand where things are going and why this might be a good idea, and are prepared to invest in something that is trying to solve that problem in a new way. And so I suppose the challenges are getting people across to understanding that vision, and then but people love the idea typically, and then secondly, because we're putting units in people's homes, there's this accepted way of doing things. Make a massive building, stick loads of servers in it, and off we go. There's complications in putting servers in people's homes. Although interestingly, we're avoiding the cost of building an enormous building. We're avoiding the cost of putting the power in, and all of those associated carbon emissions and so on, because we're reusing the infrastructure. We're using people's homes. We're using the power that's there, the connectivity that's there, and so they're all. So whilst it's doing things in a new and different way, which takes a bit of time for people to get their head around, there are actually broader benefits to doing it that way. So I think it's that two-sided. We're an energy efficiency measure in the homes, and we're also this more sustainable compute infrastructure on the other hand, compute platform on the other hand. And so we had to communicate how we were tackling and what both of those sides of the business and what we were doing. And what the benefits were for both of those audiences. So I think at the top level, people love the idea. Of course, why don't we reuse the heat from compute? Of course, that makes a lot of sense. But then when you drill down into it, you've got to take people through that sort of broader journey. It takes a certain type of person to get their head around it, I think. And I think one of the things that we often think about is, why hasn't it happened already? There's this enormous amount of waste heat that we're just getting rid of. Why aren't we? I think it was 2011, Microsoft put out a paper which was called, or they coined the term data furnaces. And the idea was that they envisioned, servers and compute power being put, in the community with the purpose of reusing the heat. But nothing much has really happened, since then. And I think connectivity, networking is improving now, so that the sending of data is making that more possible. But moving heat is really, really hard, So if you imagine you've got heat coming from this massive box, if you want to transport the heat, you've got to dig up the ground and put insulated pipes in the ground. Then you might have to upscale the heat because it loses temperature as it goes, or it might be that it's not at a high enough temperature, so you have to spend more energy, make it hotter for the end use. So you've got to have that end user somewhere nearby the data center for that to be feasible. And because we start with the data center, that then really happens, because how often do people go, yeah, let's dig up the ground and put more pipes in, and that's going to, how much is that going to cost? Crikey. And then maybe the end user for the heat, and that business doesn't end up, moves or something. It's complicated. So moving heat's hard, but moving data is easy, and certainly getting easier all the time. So it enables us to think about that problem differently, which is you start with the processing rather than the data center. And when you start with the processing, you go, well, maybe we could just take the processing to where the heat's needed. And so you don't have to shift the heat around. And so that's what we're trying to, that's sort of what we're doing effectively. And we put the servers, in people's homes right where the heat's needed, and we send the data rather than the heat. And I think as connectivity improves, 5-10 years from now, what will be possible on that distributed network will be, far broader. And probably the idea of having compute more embedded in the community will be less new. There'll be advantages to doing it that become clearer.
Yeah, I think from a business perspective, a startup who is first in that kind of field is obviously advantageous in the fact that you have no competitors. It's completely blue ocean thinking, I think they call it. The only issue you have then is to educate your customers, right? Or the people who would be buying the product essentially. And you're also educating them as you're educating yourself a lot of the time, because it is such a new product. Have you found that's the case?
I think it is. Yeah, we definitely, you have to communicate what we're doing, and then the next thing we have to do is try and communicate where we fit into their mix. Currently, so there are regulatory changes coming. So businesses are thinking, crikey, how do we report the impact of our compute? And it's really difficult to know what to do there, actually. What's the impact of all these different components? How do we go about improving that? And how can we really trust that the changes that we'll make will be beneficial? For example, some people are shifting. Let's say you're a business in Scotland and you currently process things in a data center there. Maybe you're thinking of shifting everything to the cloud, and the data centers that support that might be near London, for example. And so you think you've been told you're becoming more sustainable, but actually the carbon intensity of the electricity in London versus Scotland is much higher. So that they've almost been better just keeping where they were in terms of the carbon impact of their compute, for example. So it's really difficult to, and then there's 100% renewable. Data center says we produce no carbon because we're 100% renewable, which is really, you're using, whatever the electricity you are using at that point of time where you are located is the real carbon, impact of the, but by these power purchase agreements or carbon credits, they're able to say we're 100% renewable, which isn't really true. And you're sort of just getting to the front of the queue for renewables, but then the long tail, we're still using all the carbon intensive electricity. It's better if we reduce the amount of electricity we're using, rather than doing that. So anyway, going on a bit here, but the point is, it's really complicated to know what to do, and what we're trying to communicate is that we can, for certain types of workloads, and describing where that fits in their mix, we can make a massive change that you can really rely upon, because here you're comparing all that electricity plus the cooling, plus the hot water, versus, well, we can get rid of the cooling, we can do the compute, and we can do that hot water at the same time. So it's like a real step change in impact. And then there's also the social impact, which is a really important part of the sustainability mix. It's not just about carbon impact, but it's about what positive impact or what not negative impact are you having, in your community through your actions.
How did you find the group of people, or how did you find people to invest in your business? How did that go?
Often we had some people just got in touch with us quite often. I think you hear, once you start, your name is circulated a little bit. I think we were featured in a few things that helped, a New Scientist article, and in a more consumer land, the Fully Charged, did a little feature on the servers in people's homes. And so I think those sorts of things just get you on people's radar. But then we did some outreach ourselves, which was, just looking at funds and people that have got that, overlap. Obviously they've got money, but they want to do something good and useful with it. And so I think the last investment around was Green Angel Ventures, and so that's why they exist, to try to invest in companies that are trying to tackle that problem. So I think we targeted people like that, really, and then it's a question of, are you at the right stage for how their fund invests and so on. So we've got some good connections there that as we progress, some of the people we've spoken to might be interested, once we're a bit further along.
When did you decide, right, now is the time that we need to raise some money for our business? Because I think you tend to find a lot of people don't know when that moment is, when they're like, right, we need to get some money now. It might be the case that the bank's empty. That could always be a motivator.
Well, in our case, we were doing something that was quite new, and we needed infrastructure to be able to, or we needed to build something to be able to prove what we were doing. And so we won a few grants to test things. A couple of Innovate UK grants. One was looking at distributed compute and how that works, and then another was looking at, which is currently running, which is looking at how the Heata unit affects the householders' bills, such that we can be an energy efficiency measure that affects energy performance certificates. So that's sort of in progress. So, but really the funding was just because we were pre-revenue, we had a lot that we needed to do to prove. And so the only way to do that was to gain investment, get people on board with the vision, and who could enable us to then build what we needed to build to demonstrate what we were doing was viable.
Right. And you mentioned there about circulating your name, obviously. How did you go about that? What was the journey?
I mean, I don't know if it was particularly sort of tactical or planned. I think we were mainly focused on trying to solve the problem with a small team. We didn't have a lot of time, but I'm just trying to think mainly we responded to people showing interest, and we socialized, the fact that we were part of Innovate UK. We sort of got in amongst the sort of cohort of businesses that are doing similar sorts of things. That was really useful, and the connections come through that, and so that helps to socialize it. We also had some support from Sustainable Ventures. They're based in County Hall, nice views of the House of Parliament, so on there. And so there's an ecosystem surrounding them, and we were part of that. And so I think that was kind of how we started to socialize what we were doing. Not because we were sort of advertising here or doing this. It was much more organic, I think, and finding people who were sort of influential in that sustainability tech space. And I think things sort of grow from there.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So I think that, again, to people we have on the podcast, that tends to be the first step is, right, what communities can I tap into? What what groups can I be a part of? And you were part of Innovate UK, is that right?
Yeah, so we had some funding from Innovate UK. We're actually part of a net zero heat cohort, which is a bunch of businesses that are trying to help with that challenge, I suppose, but don't look like the existing options in the space. So the tendency is on the housing side is to put another combi boiler in, or whatever, well, I know what they are, let's put another one of those in, or something like that. And so there are people building really interesting solutions there, but how do they scale? And what are the blockers in the market to doing that? And so that cohort is about trying to address those and unlock the opportunity for these new ideas, which can be part of tackling that challenge.
I feel like you were in a very fortunate position where you had a really compelling purpose, right? It's not something no one can not get behind, helping people heat their homes for free, essentially free energy, right? And are you feeling yourself there's a lot of, because you're in these circles, a big rise in tech for good startup businesses?
I guess we've kind of been inserted into that rather than being part of a movement, So I suppose I think there are a lot of businesses trying to do that. Yeah. I'm not so familiar with the, excuse me, the broader scope of it, really. But I think what's interesting is that there are people trying to reimagine things, and they just need a bit. They need a bit more support, I suppose, to make it happen. And that, I think there's a lot. Like, the government needs. It'd be great if the government could support these initiatives, rather than say it's all heat pumps are the answer, for example, on the housing side. When actually probably the answer is a bunch of things, really. We need to support a bunch of things in the market being part of the solution. So we need to support not just software as a service, or like, just all of it. It's like that. I suppose we need to get funding needs to, or it'd be good if people were funding not what looks like the easy scalable wins all the time.
I see what you mean. Yeah, so they'll be kind of, oh, this is gonna make us a bit of money, rather than this is gonna be a tough slog, but if it pays off.
Yeah, on our journey, I suppose we realised that there are some VCs or people that are up for that, supporting that challenge, and then there are others that want to invest in something that they can see a quick or an easier return on. It's all based in the cloud, and once that's all, we've closed that off, and you can see that it's working, we can scale it and what have you. Whereas some of our challenges that we face in net zero, do stray into the physical world, and it's important for us to try and support that kind of innovation too in the UK.
It is a really interesting kind of part of Heata, and the fact that it is completely new. No one else is doing it the way you're doing it. If for anybody out there who has an idea that perhaps is probably a little bit too early, what advice would you give them, do you think? Is there any piece of advice or anything that you found going out there with this brand new idea?
I mean, I think probably it's like many, many people at startups. They just say, keep going, I suppose. I think that's kind of, we had a bit of hiatus through the pandemic. It could have died, quite easily, but we just kept pushing. And I think, gradually we got a bit of momentum. And I think, but the other thing is that not everything is going to work out, is it? Not everything's going to survive. But I think if you really believe in it, and you think it's, even if you might not ultimately be the answer, but you're part of a change, perhaps, then I think it's just to try and just keep going. And then hopefully, what you're doing will ultimately get some momentum. If I think back to when we started, say 5-6 years ago, almost wouldn't have been possible back then. And the world has changed, and in those years, connectivity has improved significantly. And so what we were talking about that back then that we could see wasn't possible at the time, whereas now it feels like it is possible. And in 5 or 10 years' time, imagine what that will look like. So I think it's like keep your eye on how you think the world is going to change. If you think it's going to come, and just try and hang in there until it comes to you, maybe a little bit.
And if you're passionate about it, like you are, we always say that only about, if you have to be passionate, I guess, if you're in that sort of field, because otherwise you'd give up pretty quick.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just feels, in our case, it just feels, it kind of comes back to what I was saying right at the start, about the things that appeal to me, being kind of problem solving, or sort of an elegance in a solution, perhaps. That's me bigging myself up there. But I guess I like simplicity, I suppose. And if you can boil things down to something that, pithy, that makes sense. And when you look at the energy use, maybe it's like 8% by 2030 that's going to be on data centers and what have you. And then you think a massive chunk of that energy is, getting rid of, just dealing with waste heat, the waste heat problem. Just the elegance of trying to reuse that waste heat to start to support, the need for heat in society just sort of makes quite a lot of sense. Why shouldn't we be doing this? There's huge amounts of investment going into this space, to build, all these data centers that are going to support the, AI and what have you. Some chunk of that investment surely should be going towards trying to use that energy more efficiently. And so that really appeals to me, apart from having young children who are going to be living in the world that we're giving to them. So hopefully, I don't know, 25 years from now, a more decent chunk of our compute resource will be much more energy efficient, because we've sort of built this idea of reuse into the system. Interestingly, Open UK and the Open Compute project, I think, are pulling together a data center blueprint, which looks at data center infrastructure sort of holistically. So everything from open designs for the hardware that might use weight. If you imagine, every hardware manufacturer has their own way of making stuff, and so they've got plans which use much less metal, say, in the server, and the cabinets and all that sort of stuff. And so some big hyperscalers are incorporating that now, which is fantastic. And then you also have got things like, well, when we've got an infrastructure that we want to put in place, where do we put it? Do we build a new building and all the carbon emissions associated with that, and putting the power in and what have you? Or do we look at existing buildings that would be a good fit for this, where so we're maximizing the spend, the carbon spend, because we've already built that building. Now it's having another life as a data center, and then heat reuse is part of that too. So I think it'd be really interesting to see if that kind of data center blueprint is adopted at scale, because that could really start to drive what we're doing and what the industry as a whole could be doing to better use that energy.
No, it makes complete sense. I guess I'm looking at time, but I didn't realize we were talking that long. The last few questions I've got, really, Michael, is firstly, what can we expect from Heata in the next 12, 18 months?
Good question. I would hope that we will, our compute, case studies will start to grow, and we'll be doing more 3D rendering. I think for our, architectural visualization is a great example. We'll be doing more of that, and hopefully we'll have some good clients on board on the sort of more general compute side as well, and we'll be able to start telling the story of how the Heata, the companies that are placing the workloads with Heata, and the network, the people in the community that's part of it, how those things are starting to work together, and it's we can see that it's really, really, really working and having a positive impact. So I think that'll be the thing for us, proving what we're doing, and starting to tell the positive story of how those things are connected. And then I imagine we may well be looking to raise again in that sort of time scale, if we're going to expand.
Last question I always like to finish on this. If today was your last day on Earth and you weren't on this amazing podcast, obviously, or spending time with family.
It's high up there on the list, though, Jack. It's high up there on the list.
Thank you, Michael. What would you be up to?
Good question. Well, I'd probably spend it with my family, I guess. Probably going to walk somewhere, maybe in the forest, something like that. I don't know. It'd be family and nature, I think, would be involved as my last day on Earth. As many as my family as possible. Well, I don't know if maybe I don't know. Maybe it's just my immediate family, because too many people, you can't speak to them all, can you? So maybe a FaceTime with some of them in person, and then out in nature. That would be what I'd do, I think.
Grant, so well, look, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and incredibly excited. I think just to round up, I think what Heata's doing is amazing. It's incredible, and I hope more and more people realize it, and I hope it really does kick off to the way it should do. And I'm excited to see where it is in the next 12 to 18 months.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we'll catch you on the next one.